Welcome to episode 2 of How I Learned to Sing. This episode is about the classical part of my training, the beginnings of it anyway. So before we get into it, I've talked about my audition for university before, for Xavier University's music department before in previous videos, so I'm not going to rehash all of that. However, there are 3 things you need to know for the sake of context. Number 1, by the time I auditioned for university, I had 3 years of vocal training under my belt, but the technique that I was taught was predicated upon the idea that all you needed to train was your vocal folds. So for 3 years, I did training that hinged completely, 100% solely upon my vocal folds. Number 2, my audition sucked. I had a horrible audition. I cracked multiple times. I was beyond pitchy. Pitchy, in case you don't know, means you're a little sharp, you're a little flat, or maybe you're sharp consistently or flat consistently. I was beyond sharp or flat. I was just completely missing notes at my audition. I was totally derailed by nerves. I was physically trembling and I couldn't stop it. It was really bad. But my test scores and my grades were exceptional, and I was allowed entry as kind of an experiment almost. So because I'd already been accepted into the university with a full tuition academic scholarship. So it was okay, smart boy, let's see what you do kind of thing. And number 3, I had 0 music theory training. I might have known a few terms like octave or crescendo, from church, but I didn't know anything. I didn't know music in a structured form. So I didn't know about intervals and I knew nothing about how to read music. I didn't have that kind of formal education musicianship-wise. So let's fast forward to my first day of class, the most important day for a video like this. My first class that required me to actually sing was concert choir. And I was very happy to be a part of it because keep in mind, in case you haven't watched my previous videos, I was laughed out of choirs when I was in junior high. I was not allowed entry into the concert choir in my high school. So to be in a concert choir at a university was a big deal for me at that time. And the choir director, who was also my voice teacher, he goes to the organ and he's and he plays and starts singing this melody for the warm-up. And everybody starts singing around me with these huge voices, these resonant voices, these big voices. And then and I just everywhere we're just climbing up the scale, we're just going up half steps. And I felt overwhelmed. I can feel the nervousness now. I can literally feel the nervousness even as I tell this to you. And this was over a decade ago. I remember feeling like I was being dwarfed by sound, just enveloped by these cascading waves of sound. And I was impressed, and I was also terrified because I felt like I was being, my voice was being swallowed whole. Because, to be more clear, he started pointing people out, which damn near gave me a panic attack. He started with the baritone section, my section, the hell. The bass baritone, basses and baritones were all one section, basically. And so he's like, Kenny, sing. He's like, no, and making these tones. And John, no. And he's giving them directions and directives that I did not comprehend. So he's saying things like, that was good, Kenny, but more pharyngeal space, lift the soft palate. And Kenny's like, oh. And he's like, yes. And then he's like, John, now you, more support. Ah. And they're making these tones, and I am freaking out because he's doing these mini voice lessons on the spot. And so he gets to me, and I'm like, nah, ah. And I'm cracking. Now, the reason why I could feel myself stiffening up just thinking about it, wow. The thing is, keep in mind, I had expensive training with a coach who taught basically a mixed voice technique. And I won't be too much more specific than that because I really hate to bash other teachers or other techniques. And it did help me to a degree. It helped to heal my voice. But at this point, I was used to vocalizing 3 octaves a day. But I was used to I was used to blending, but with a very small, narrowed sound. So to suddenly be expected to do, I didn't even know how to begin making this sound. And so he's like, Eric, your turn. And I'm like, nah, nah. And I accidentally blended, but I remember cracking. I couldn't even connect. It's like I had no training at all. It's like I was a complete novice. I couldn't even begin to control my voice. And he kind of laughed. I mean, not in like the jerky way, but he kind of was like, that's fine. Just try to like, oh, and like, nah, my nervousness completely, I felt like my body just wouldn't do what I needed to do. And then what made it worse was I could see the girls in the soprano section snickering off to the side. And eventually he moved on, like out of mercy, I guess. But I remember feeling so defeated, and I can remember it very clearly because I remember thinking, why do I think I can do this? Nobody else seems to believe I can do this except for me. But I keep going after this, like, what the hell? Like, I have test scores and grades that seem to suggest I'd be better suited to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. But I keep trying to do this singing thing, even though I clearly suck at it. And I just remember thinking, like, I cheated to get here. Like, I don't deserve to be here. I felt like an imposter. And so I had already made up in my mind, like, even before class was done, like, if I changed majors, what else could I be? Because obviously it's not going to be a singer, because I can't even begin to make these sounds that these people are making. Yeah, it was classical, because universities do that. But in my mind, I was already kind of giving up. But then, it's like a fleeting thought in my mind. I was like, yeah, but also everyone around me can do this. I remember that kind of war, the inner gremlin kind of saying, like, you don't deserve to be here. Like, dude, go do something that nerds do, because this is not your thing. You can barely keep your composure in front of a crowd. You can barely sing a note in a freaking classroom, and you're gonna like be a professional performer. So that was kind of that. But I didn't quit. My next class right after concert choir was my first one-on-one voice lesson with my teacher, with my new teacher. I'll call him Dr. Brooks. Not that I have anything bad to say about him, but just for the sake of privacy. I don't know how he would feel about me putting him on blast. But yeah, I went to Dr. Brooks' class afterward. And as soon as I walked in, he was sitting at the piano. And as soon as I walked in, his first words were, "You're gonna have to develop a thicker skin." And I immediately knew what he was talking about, because it was probably visible how how devastated I was. I was devastated, and I felt hopeless. I did, and he was like, "This is tough." And he's like, "But you're smart, and smart people do well with music." And he said, "There's no such thing as a dumb musician or a dumb good musician." And he told me, "You have a great voice," and I started to get happy. He's like, "You're not a great singer now." And I was like, "Oh." And he was like, "No," he's like, "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to use your voice. But great singers are made." And immediately, it was the first time I had ever heard anyone else say out loud that I could be great, just to even mention the possibility. And that was very empowering to me. I just needed that boost. And he also told me, he was like, "A lot of the people laughing at you, they sounded way worse 2-3 years ago. 4 years ago. He's like, a lot of those people, what you're hearing is years of training. They didn't roll out of bed singing like that." And I needed to hear that as well. So I'm going to give you the 3 things that he shared with me in that first lesson, and that I learned in my first 2 years at Xavier University that really helped me out. And in the next episode, I'm going to go through what I learned in the following years. But this is the beginning of my classical training. So he told me, "Eric, you have this big voice that you're trying to squeeze through this tiny space." So again, at this point, I had been taught only about my vocal folds. Ideas like support or anything, like, let me rewind. He had me focus on breathing throughout my whole body, something I had never been taught before. So the idea of sending, your lungs are up here, your diaphragm's up here. So the idea of breathing lower seemed ridiculous to me. But what I learned was that you can have a felt sense of breathing lower, even if that's not in fact what is literally happening. So I learned that. And also he taught me my first he gave me my introduction into body connection. So he had me do my little tight, narrow sound, and he pressed with his fist. I do not recommend this, by the way, but this is what he did. Again, this is how I learned to sing. I don't recommend this, though. But he had me stand against the door, and he leaned into me with his body weight, with his fist. And I was like, ah. An amazing sound? No. But it was a bigger sound. And what it taught me was that stuff that happens here can affect stuff that happens here, can affect stuff that happens here, can affect what you hear, whatever. So, and that was my introduction into that I could do things with my torso muscles that could affect the quality of my tone, which is not something I had ever learned before with my very mixed voice, vocal fold focused technique. Also, he talked about me creating space. Now, my first teacher did emphasize keeping the throat relaxed, but this new teacher, Dr. Brooks, had me focused on enhancing that space or emphasizing that space consciously. Again, I don't necessarily recommend doing this. I have certain views on how best to go about this that I'll share in a minute. But he had me open up, so I was engaging and also opening. Wasn't the best sound ever, but it was better than what I was doing. Or let me say this, it was different. So again, the takeaway from that was that there were other aspects to my instrument beyond my vocal folds. My torso muscles played a role. My throat space played a role. And this was new to me. And it gave me some hope because these are things I hadn't touched. So I was like, okay, I'm not naturally gifted at singing, but I'm good at learning stuff, if that makes sense. So I was like, okay, there's still some uncharted territory here. There are still things left to learn. And lastly was the idea that singing was athletic. I had this mythological idea in my head that singing would be effortless. And I now know for a fact and from experience that even my favorite singers aren't singing effortlessly. If you're really good, you can make it look effortless, but it's never effortless, not if you're singing healthily. But it was my first time hearing that singing was an athletic feat. So in my first voice lesson, I was sweating, like he had me sweating. And partially probably from nervousness, to be honest, but also from the sheer physical exertion, but my throat felt fine. Now, I have other videos where I talk more about how I think that support is a bit more nuanced or a lot more nuanced than just tightening your abs. I do not recommend that. That's what he taught me in that first lesson. I don't even know if Dr. Brooks still teaches that now. I really don't know. It's been years since I've talked to him. I don't even know if he knows what I'm doing now, like on YouTube and in the world and stuff. I don't know. But he taught me this very narrow view of support, but it did introduce me to what the body could do. But if you click on one of the links, I'll put a link in the info box, in the description box below or wherever, where I kind of go deeper into detail on what I think more balanced support looks like. But connecting to my body definitely made my voice bigger. And also there are things that can happen with the throat. I don't believe I have any YouTube videos on this, but if you book a lesson one-on-one or join my phase 1 or phase 2 programs, we definitely talk about this a bit, especially in phase 2. I feel like, again, these things have like gray area and they're nuanced. And so I like to teach them one-on-one to make sure that the student is doing them correctly. But that's what I learned in college. And for the first 2 years, I focused on developing those techniques. Did I immediately become amazing? No. No, I really didn't. But I grew. And it was the beginning of me discovering a whole new dimension to my instrument. So, and I had, it wasn't a straight line. It was more like a squiggly line with a few spirals downward, then back up. And in the following episodes, I'll talk about those. But that's kind of it. If you have any questions, please feel free to hit me up on Instagram or Snapchat. I'm not really on my Facebook the way I should be, sorry. But on Instagram at Eric Arsenault, or if you just want vocal stuff without my personal feelings and selfies and stuff, then just go to A-Approach on Instagram. And yeah, hit me up. Let me know what else you want me to talk about that I may have missed or that you would want me to go into more detail about. But that's kind of it for this episode of How I Learned to Sing. And until next time, peace.